Alright, welcome to the channel. Let's get into this 9 dangerous details about Nick Reiner before killing his parents.
Of the 32-year-old, description: Nick Reiner is in jail, reportedly, quote, in a fog, more than a week after prosecutors say he stabbed his parents to death. And now we're seeing conflicting descriptions of the 32-year-old that could play a big role in his defense. Was he a lost soul who struggled with addiction, who was entitled and needed his rich parents for everything in his life? Or was he someone diagnosed with a serious mental health condition that directly played a role in the dark and twisted actions he's been accused of? The bombshell reporting that just came down and the staggering price tag of his mental health treatment before the murders that few outside the wealthy Hollywood elite would be able to afford. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick before we begin, if you are looking for a deal on the perfect gift, I want you to see the Meat Chef IQ Sense Smart Meat Thermometer. It is the secret to stress-free, flawless cooking, whether you're a seasoned chef or someone like me, you're just starting out trying to survive. The Smart Thermometer can guarantee perfect results every time, so no more perfect results. And from holiday turkey to prime defense, could be. In the week after his parents were killed and he was arrested, there have been plenty of theories about Nick's bizarre behavior the night before Rob and Michelle Reiner were found stabbed to death inside their Brentwood, LA mansion. The Hollywood Reporter talked about Nick going up to people at a party at Conan O'Brien's house, a holiday party, demanding to know who they were, demanding to know if they were famous, reportedly staring at people like comedian Bill Hader, in a way that just made everybody feel uncomfortable at this party. Their actions that led to an alleged blowout fight between Nick Reiner and his dad, Hollywood legend Rob Reiner. Nick reportedly acted so odd that people thought that he was just a guy who had wandered in off the street, not someone related to perhaps one, if not the most famous person at that party. But
So pretty much, Rob's son Nick was strung out on drugs, tripping his balls out. And he embarrassed the hell out of his father, and they had a big ass argument. And then, I guess later on that night, he said, "Fuck you, I'm gonna slit your throat." So I don't know, allegedly.
now it seems like we are hearing another side to the story that could have huge implications if this double murder case one day goes to trial. TMZ is reporting that Nick Reiner was diagnosed with schizophrenia in the weeks before his parents were murdered. TMZ says that it's spoken with someone who has direct knowledge of how Nick is doing in prison. And the story says that Nick's in a fog right now because of the medical condition and the medications that he's on, saying that Nick is, quote, not reeling in grief. This story, and whoever TMZ's source is, may be an effort to change the public narrative about Nick Reiner that has become so public in the past week, that Reiner is an addict who had to go to rehab more than a dozen times even before he was an adult, someone who used to be homeless in multiple states, a person who didn't really do anything for work other than what appeared to be a failed acting, directing, and writing career.
And I don't even care if anyone calls me a Sally, because I'm a snail and I'm never gonna fail. And you know what? You're gonna have to bail me out of jail.
That's Nick Reiner in a video that has since gone viral. It's incredibly bizarre. He posted it around 2016 on his YouTube page.
Everyone wants to know how you get your exercise in because you're so lean.
I do it like ISIS. I usually only do one at a time.
Now that video, again, it's gotten a lot of views right now, and it certainly is shaping a perception that Nick Reiner was bizarre, lost, a lot of negative words surrounding him at this point. Now, it's unclear what the purpose was for that video. You think back around 2016, it appears that he was trying to get into show business, kind of the family trade, if you will, because of his dad. Maybe this was something where he was doing a character in hopes of one day being an actor. Now, we know that he wrote that movie called Being Charlie that came out around 2016, loosely based on his own life, about a man who was struggling with heroin addiction and being homeless. Now, that film was directed by his dad, Rob Reiner, and it could be seen that Rob, who has directed some of the biggest movies of all time, movies nominated for Oscars, that he really took on this film more as an effort to connect with his struggling son as opposed to being a way to make another successful classic movie.
if your kid is going through rough times, the parent your main job is to keep your child safe. So
that's Rob and Nick appearing together when they were doing press for Being Charlie. This is a clip from AOL's Build series. It's now going viral on YouTube. Nick and Rob talk about in this press appearance that doing this movie together really meant something to their relationship.
I think the bonding came not from the story itself, but from the fact that we were working on a movie together.
But now it seems a new narrative is coming to light. Nick's attorney is Alan Jackson, the same man who defended Karen Reed in the high-profile case where she was accused of killing her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. And if you followed that story, you know that Jackson did an incredibly good job in presenting a theory about what happened to John O'Keefe that was very different from what...
So, what I'm gathering is, when they go to court with this thing, they're going to try to plead insanity, being that he's diagnosed with schizophrenia. He's not in his right mind. So, yeah.
Prosecutors were alleging. Now, it's unclear if Jackson himself or someone close to Jackson is TMZ's source, but you do look at the storyline that's now coming out, making it seem like there is a case to be made that Nick's alleged actions could be more the result of mental health disease compared to addiction and his own personal responsibility. Now, TMZ also says that Nick's medications were changed in the weeks leading up to his parents' murders and, quote, they were causing Nick to lose even more control. Doctors were adjusting the meds to no avail. TMZ also reports that Nick was in the care of an LA rehab facility in recent weeks. And get the price tag for this place. Reportedly $70,000 a month. Incredible. Now, there's been reporting that's also come out that Nick's behavior was just getting very odd and potentially...
Man, $70,000 a month for rehab? Only in LA. Nah. There's no way I pay that much for my son, even if I was buku rich. Maybe the first time, but he ain't been to rehab like 14, 15 times.
Disturbing as of late. According to TMZ, there's a gas station near where the Reiners lived in Los Angeles in the ritzy Brentwood section where Nick regularly went to go buy cigarettes. And employees of that gas station said that in the days leading up to the Reiners' murders that Nick reportedly looked drained and he was acting standoffish in a way that they considered to be abnormal from the person that they typically knew who came in to buy some smokes. On top of that, you have reports from this holiday party at Conan O'Brien's house the night before the Reiners were murdered. And not only did Nick and Rob get into this apparent massive blowout verbal altercation, there's a report that claims that Rob Reiner confided in someone at that party that not only was he concerned for his son, he was reportedly scared of his son. According to the Daily Mail, Rob Reiner said at the party, quote, as one of the gathered A-listers told it, minutes after Nick stormed out, Rob became emotional, going over to a group of friends and saying, I'm petrified of him. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm afraid of my son. I think my own son can hurt me. Now, that's just a Daily Mail account. It hasn't been...
Damn. That's crazy, man.
confirmed, but...
Pretty much he predicted his own death.
I think it's notable when you consider what happened allegedly hours later. Rob and Michelle Reiner allegedly stabbed to death in their home, reportedly found by their own daughter the next day when a massage therapist couldn't access the house, and that therapist then called someone to get into the home, and that is when their daughter reportedly found Rob dead. It's been reported that first responders needed to tell that daughter that her mom was also dead inside the house. The Daily Mail reports that the fight at Conan's house between Rob and Nick was actually so loud that someone thought about calling 911, but Conan stopped that person, saying it's his house, his party, and he didn't want the cops to be called. Now, Conan has yet to comment on any of this, but an interesting line in that story, and think about how this could factor in.
Man, Conan don't want no police at his house because everybody in there doing coke, probably. But that's just my guess, man. But if I was afraid my son would take my life, then somehow, some way, he wouldn't be living with me. I have to get him the fuck out of there.
Into a Nick Reiner defense, if this case ever goes to trial, the line from the story is, quote, "When the expletive was hitting the fan, somebody said we need to call the police. The conversation was about getting this kid put into a mental health hold." Now, another source seems to be building that new narrative for Nick.
I had my dog out. He's eating every fucking thing. I'm about to put him up.
And shifting the blame to someone else, perhaps arguing that Rob and Michelle Reiner's murders were preventable if someone had stepped up and helped someone who is diagnosed mentally unwell. Now, after the alleged murders, Nick reportedly went to a hotel in Santa Monica, which is about 4 miles from his parents' house. And he allegedly checked into the hotel around 4 o'clock in the morning. That's according to a variety of media reports. One of them saying that Nick looked, quote, tweaked out at the time. Now, the room, the next day, when the staff went to clean the room after Nick had left, they said that they found blood everywhere in that room. Incredibly disturbing discovery. And another big TMZ report related to that hotel. Think about the evidence that may be very important to the investigation and potentially linking Nick to these murders. According to TMZ, police perhaps searched that room without a warrant, which could raise questions about whether what they found in that room would be admissible in court. We'll have to see how that part plays out. Now, Nick, of course, was arrested by police on Sunday night. It was around...
Now, I know maybe that will be admissible, but the daughter found his parents murdered, so bottom line, he's still gonna do life. I mean, now, you know, in drug cases, whenever cops, sometimes when they don't have search warrants, any evidence can be thrown out. But in this case, I don't think it matters.
9:30 in the evening, so roughly 6 hours after his parents' bodies were found. And he was found near the campus of the University of Southern California, which is roughly 15 miles from his parents' house. NBC Los Angeles was the first to obtain this video showing Nick at a convenience store buying a sports drink, and then he walks across the street, and then police pull up and take him into custody. Nick has been in custody ever since, and that is where the source tells TMZ that he's been in a daze, to the point that he hasn't even been able to process the deaths of his parents. Now, it appears that Nick's defense may be insanity if he pleads not guilty, and that he didn't understand what he was doing when he allegedly killed his parents. That schizophrenia and prescribed medications given to him by a doctor are more to blame than the personal responsibility when it comes to what allegedly happened to the Reiners. And certainly, the prosecution may argue that it could potentially be any sort of substances that Nick took the night of the murders, pointing to addiction as more of a reason for the murders. We'll see how all of that potentially could play out. Now, it does appear...
That motherfucker look crazy. I gotta screenshot this picture and maybe use it as a thumbnail, because I don't know, bro, look like a psycho killer.
that there were people, though, who had concerns about Nick long before escape.
Like this bitch, too.
Schizophrenia diagnosis, that the concerns about who he was went on for years. Fox News spoke to a woman who says that she once worked with Nick on the TV show Family Guy. Nick was an intern. She says that the only reason, though, that Nick got the internship was because of his dad. She described Nick as dark and twisted. Again, this is all the way back in 2014, and apparently, according to Fox, Nick got this job after he had left rehab. He did tell People magazine once that he had been to rehab more than a dozen times by the time he was 18 years old. Nick has yet to enter a plea to these charges. He did briefly appear in court last week. His attorney requested more time before entering a plea on his behalf. We couldn't...
Hey, yo, this nigga had a job at Family Guy, yo. That's that privilege. That's that nepotism. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but this kid, you know what I'm saying? The world was at his fingertips. But unfortunately, fortunately, man, it wasn't enough. Fortunately, he had a bad addiction, drug addiction, and he didn't take advantage of his privileged and well-connected resources. You know what I'm saying? His dad's one of the most prominent directors in Hollywood, so he could have easily had a career in Hollywood, easily, but drugs, man.
To see Nick in court because he was in an enclosed area, and the judge ruled that the media in the room cannot take pictures of him or video of him. We did get a few courtroom sketches showing him in a blue vest, similar to the kind that a defendant or suspect would wear so they don't harm themselves. We also heard Nick's voice, but he only said 3 words.
Mr. Reiner, you have a constitutional and statutory right to speedy arraignment. Your counsel is requesting that your arraignment be continued to January 7, 2026. Do you waive your right to a speedy arraignment so that your arraignment can be heard on January 7, 2026?
Those words were, yes, Your Honor. He was then taken back to the county jail where he is right now. He will officially be arraigned on January 7th. Joining us now to talk a little bit more about where this case could go from here is Sherry Botwin, who is a licensed clinical social worker, as well as the author of Thriving After Trauma. Thank you, as always, for being with us here on Law and Crime. Before we dive into, I think, some of the specifics of this case with Nick Reiner, we often hear about schizophrenia, and unfortunately, it's often tied, I think, in our world, if people watch Law and Crime, to pretty tough cases. I think just to start, can you just lay out what schizophrenia actually is?
I mean, in layman's terms, it's a crazy-making, awful mental health disorder. The way we would describe it, it's a serious brain disorder, and people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia will struggle with hallucinations, delusions, psychosis, anxiety, kind of like when you think about someone who's not in the moment or not present, and in reality, people with schizophrenia go in and out of being in and out of reality, and it's an awful, crazy-making type of disorder.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, TMZ has come out with this report that he is in jail right now, and he doesn't really seem to understand what's going on. You know, in terms of this TMZ report, they said he was in a fog. Before diving into that part of it, just what was your reaction? I mean, he's 32 years old, and this report comes out that in recent weeks he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
My first reaction was, I'm not really sure about that. When someone is diagnosed with schizophrenia, that diagnosis usually comes out when someone is in late adolescence, early adulthood. So most of these diagnoses are happening around age 18, 19, 20. He's 32 years old, so I thought it was kind of ironic that are we a week after the murder, suddenly we're hearing that he has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Doesn't really sit well with me, but again, there's obviously...
Just off of that means that this could be premeditated for real, first degree. You know what I'm saying? Like, he should have been diagnosed. So it's mighty funny that you just going to the doctor now, and then 2 weeks later after you diagnose, your father ends up dying. So, I don't know.
A lot that I would need to know to understand if that's actually the case.
Because you have this, I mean, he was public about his struggle with addiction in his life. He wrote this movie that his dad directed. You know, he certainly battled his demons, to say the least. But then you have, on one side, prosecutors saying, well, yes, he was, you know, someone who struggled with addiction, but he's someone they believe who committed these crimes, and he's being charged with first-degree murder. On the flip side of it, you see, you know, if he pleads not guilty by reason of insanity, you could see Alan Jackson going with, you know, this was really the result of schizophrenia. Oh, and by the way, he was in the care of a psychiatrist who changed his meds.
Yeah.
What do you make of how that could play out? I know we're a long way away here from when there could actually be a trial, but if that's the direction we go from the defense point of view, based on your experience and what you know, what do you make of that?
The defense is doing their job. You know, they're doing a really good job, but I find that in cases like this, what happens is the defense team is trying to point fingers at anyone but the alleged perpetrator. So wouldn't that be an easy explanation to a horrific, absolutely horrible tragedy to say, oh, well, actually the psychiatrist was the one taking care of him. He was apparently, and this is true, he was going through medication changes. So when someone's going through medication changes, they can experience what we would call adverse side effects. And some of these medications can lead to aggression, violence, hostility, delusions, hallucinations. Those are all things that can be true. But again, I think what we have to find out is what was happening with Nick weeks before the crime took place, and was he actually having those type of side effects from the medication? If that's the case, why wasn't he inpatient? If he's at danger of harming himself or others, even if it's because he's having an adverse reaction to medication, you would think he would be in the hospital. So I could see where the defense is going. They're trying to veer off, I think, the crime and find another reason for what happened. Are they going to be able to do that? Like you said, there's so much more that we have to find out about the case and what was happening with Nick prior to the crime. But the defense is doing what the defense attorneys usually do in these types of cases. He's doing his job.
Well, and you look at, and there's people who have come out talking about the issues that just Nick seemed to have had. And he, from the addiction standpoint.
I mean, that is one consistent thing. So everybody that came in contact with him, the gas station they went to, people at the Family Guy job he used to work with, everybody's saying that he's dark, he's twisted, he's crazy as a motherfucker. So
there's these anecdotes that people just found him to be kind of twisted, and these are just all reports and people coming out, the sister apparently, when she finds, her parents, she said that Nick was the person who, police should look at because he had a tendency to be violent. I guess how could, going into trial, does the fact that he's diagnosed as schizophrenic, does that cancel out the fact that there appears to be a lot of concern that people had about him before this was an issue when it came to schizophrenia? And, if he had, we don't know if he's consumed anything the night that all of this happened, but, allegedly happened. But I guess how do you sift through what could be the result of addiction as opposed to him being in this, schizophrenic state and committing this crime?
So there's a lot of steps that are going to need to take place. They're going to have someone, I'm assuming, a forensic psychiatrist, someone who specializes in substance use disorders, do intensive investigation with Nick, talk with him a ton about what medications were you on, what were some of the side effects, what were some of the thoughts that you were having. But then what they're going to need to do is they're going to need to talk to all the people who really know Nick and say, is this sort of the way he was acting for years, or is this or some of these behaviors something that you noticed within, say, the last 4 weeks since he started the medication changes? So when I think of a case like this, I think it's confusing because when someone is schizophrenic and having a psychotic break versus someone who is abusing something like heroin and acting crazy, those two things can look so much the same. So that's where we need to really look at the medical records. They're going to need to talk with Nick. They need to talk to all the people who are very close to, and also the people who treat Nick, to find out what actually is happening. There's so much speculation in these types of cases, and it almost like we're getting away from really the crime itself because it feels it's such an egregious thing that happened. It's easier for us in the community or the public to just sort of get fixated on, but he was schizophrenic, but he was going through medication changes, or maybe he had a relapse with his drug abuse. We have to really, it's going to take us a while to really figure.
Even if he did, man, goddamn, you slit your parents' throat. Like she's saying, man, a crime is a crime. Like, you ain't that much crazy in the world. He ain't crazy to motherfucking find a way to get that dope with that needle in his arm. Shit, you know how much money the motherfucker he needs to get that dope.
Figure out what actually happened. There's so much that we don't know.
If he goes down the path, Alan Jackson, who he knows really good at telling his side to the story, in the courtroom, anybody who watched the Karen Reed trial knows that. if they go down the path of not guilty by reason of insanity, there were parts of the TMZ report saying that Nick is just in a fog inside of jail, that he's not even grieving the loss of his parents. It seemed like that they were trying to make an argument just through, or at least these media reports that have come out are trying to show that he is just in this daze as he is in jail. When it comes to saying that he is not guilty by reason of insanity, how does stories like that kind of factor into that picture that's being?
One thing has nothing to do with another. When you talk about him being in a fog, what I think is, if he's in a fog, it doesn't mean that he's not aware of or know what happened. He also, he's experiencing trauma. If he really had no idea what he was doing, or if he did know what he was doing, but the reality is setting in about what he has done, and he's trying to grapple with that, all those situations could lead someone to be in a fog. Being in a fog doesn't mean that someone's insane. A lot of times when I work with trauma survivors, it's almost like you don't wake up from what just happened. It can take days, weeks, months. He's now sitting in a jail cell. He's completely out of his normal environment, away from all of his, whoever would be his support. So when we use words like that, we have to really be mindful of, but just because someone's in a fog doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing, or doesn't mean that they don't realize what they have just done. So this is where I would want to go sit in that jail cell with him and say, can you describe for me what's going on in your mind, body, and heart as you're sitting in this fog-like state? I would want to know that before I would assume anything about sane versus insane.
Well, and I think too, and also I want to be clear, I don't know if, his defense is the source of these TMZ stories, but it certainly is something that could help the defense. If all of that, that's coming out as far as him being diagnosed with schizophrenia, the medication changes, all of that is true. How in a court or in a trial, if it gets to that point, do you distinguish where, he had a heroin issue, and he's on the record for that, saying that he's had these types of problems, his family knew he had the types of problems, but how could the defense prove that in that moment, if they're not going to dispute that he wasn't the one, they're not going to dispute that he was the one who did this, how do they prove in that moment that it would have been the medication change or schizophrenia that would have led to him allegedly doing this, as opposed to it just being, what the prosecution's going to say is that this is an addict, he lived off his parents, and potentially they have some other sort of motive for this, we don't know.
I mean, this is where you need really, really good forensic psychiatrists. What's going to happen is, in court, both sides are going to be interviewing Nick and talking with him. They're going to need to prove, the defense, they're going to need to prove that in the moment when he committed the crime, he was not in a sane state. So if they find out that he was abusing drugs from off the street while also going through medication changes with the psychiatrist, that would not be enough of a reason to say not guilty by reason of insanity. So some of what they're going to need to find out is what was actually in his system the day of, minutes before, and during when the crime took place. In terms of the adverse side effects, if the defense is going to say, but that's what caused him to act this way, they're going to need to have a forensic psychiatrist break down the possible adverse reactions of these medications, but then they're also going to need to explain why Nick wasn't hospitalized. When people are schizophrenic, for example, and they're going through medicine changes, a lot of the times they'll be put inpatient during those medication changes because of what you and I are talking about right now. If there's a possibility that someone could act out in such a harmful way, you don't go through those medication changes and say to your patient, let me know how things are going. Like you would want to put them in a supportive, supervised setting. So I'm hoping that we as a society learn from this case, even when it comes to mental health, and that we need to take mental health seriously, and that when someone is going through medication changes, you really do need to keep an eye on them, because some people will experience very significant adverse side effects.
Yeah, and I think too, this is
Oh man, shit. Honestly, most people with schizophrenia and bipolar, they don't even take that medicine. So I don't know. My brother had bipolar. He's bipolar schizophrenic. And especially if you do drugs, I mean, you are who you are. Most of the time, they're not even taking their bipolar schizophrenic medicine. Because when they come down from the drugs, they just gone. Drugs and the medicine don't mix. And when you gone like that, they're not thinking about taking that medicine. They're feeling good, they high. So,
everything's been coming through kind of these media reports that he was going to a psychiatrist at some sort of rehab center for $70,000 a month, which is just a astronomical amount of money. So that's, major questions for that group if all of that's true.
$70,000 a month. That's all right. So let's say he take 3 months. That's $210,000. If he did a whole year rehab, that's over $700,000, $800,000. Crazy.
As well. I know there's been reporting out too about how he is able to afford Alan Jackson, who is one of the biggest names in criminal defense. Some have speculated that the family, the trust of the Reiners may actually be footing the bill if Alan Jackson isn't doing this pro bono. What would you make of that? Because I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear if that actually is the case.
Honestly, it doesn't surprise me, but I can imagine as this story is airing, the comments right now, as we're talking about this, the anger, the rage, that doesn't make any sense. Here's what I'll say to you. Unless you're in a situation where you have a family member who is, whether they're having a substance use disorder, a severe mental health disorder, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. We don't know the inner makings of the relationships between parents and siblings. And until you're in that situation, you can't fully understand what that would be like. I'm thinking of his siblings, and I'm thinking of his parents who are no longer here, which is so sad. And I'm thinking, so families have a loyalty, some families have a sense of obligation, some families act out of guilt and responsibility, and some families make choices like paying for the defense fund because they might be devastated about what happened to their parents and horrified, but that doesn't mean that they don't love their brother. So I feel like I'm hoping that, when people are commenting and on social media and quick to judge, that we just take a minute and think about, unless you've been in that situation, you have no idea why maybe his siblings would be, or the family would be, using the estate to fund for Nick's defense. And the other thing is, we can't ask his parents what would they think, because they're no longer here, but people who really knew his parents, they probably know what his parents would say if they knew that family was supporting him in the defense. In terms of the funding.
Yeah, no, and I think too, one thing that seemed...
That's a good point. Because, looking at it, you think, like, why the hell would his parents be paying for his defense? But, like she said, at the end of the day, they're still his parents, so they're always going to love him. And even his brothers and sisters, if they're, like if they run the estate now, they would think, what would mom and dad want us to do? I mean, they always, looked after Nick. They knew he had problems. So, yeah.
To be very apparent is that the Reiners love their son to the end, with all the challenges that he faced, and that's a tragic part of this story. Sherry Botwin, it's always great to have you on Law & Crime. I know you've written a book called Life After Trauma. Is that right? Did I say it correct? I have a terrible handwriting, but
no. It's
about your book and where people can find it.
So I wrote a book called Thriving After Trauma.
Thriving After Trauma. There we go.
You were close though. You can buy it anywhere you buy books, but the reason that we write books like this is because of stories that we're talking about today. It's about trying to make sense of things that don't make sense, about trying to come to terms with experiences that leave us completely upside down and devastated. And this again is one of those stories where I feel very heartfelt for everyone involved, and I'm hoping that we can, instead of just judge and make sort of decisions about what we think, let's learn from this and let's try to prevent this from happening again in the future.
Yeah, so incredibly well put. Author of Thriving After Trauma, Sherry Botman, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. These are such important conversations.
Thank you.
Nick Ryan.
Lava Nation, Lava Bentley here. I'm out. Subscribe, holla at me.